In Defense of Women by H.L. Mencken, Section 8, Women's Suffrage, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 35. A Mythical Daredevil. The truth is that the picture of male carnality that such women conjure up belongs almost wholly to fable, as I have already observed in dealing with the sophistries of Dr. Eliza Burt Gamble, a parologist on a somewhat higher plane. As they depict him in their fevered treatises on illegitimacy, white slave trading, and ophthalmia neonatorum, the average male adult of the Christian and cultured countries leads a life of gaudy lubricity, rolling magnificently from one liaison to another, and with an almost endless queue of ruined milliners, dancers, chairwomen, parlor maids, and waitresses behind him, all dying of poison and despair. The life of man, as these furiously envious ones see it, is the life of a leading actor in a boulevard revue. He is a polygamous, multigamous, myriadigamous, an insatiable and unconscionable debauchee, a monster of promiscuity, prodigiously unfaithful to his wife and even to his friends' wives, fathomously libidinous, and superbly happy. Needless to say, this picture bears no more relation to the facts than a dissertation on major strategy by a military "expert" promoted from dramatic critic. If the chief suffragette scaremongers, I speak without any embarrassing naming of names, were attractive enough to men, to get near enough to men to know enough about them for their purpose, they would paralyze the Dorcas societies with no such cajoling libels. As a matter of sober fact, the average man of our time and race is quite incapable of all these incandescent and intriguing divertissements. He is far more virtuous than they make him out, far less schooled in sin, far less enterprising and ruthless. I do not say, of course, that he is pure in heart, for the chances are that he isn't. What I do say is that, in the overwhelming majority of cases, he is pure in act, and even in the face of temptation. And why? For several main reasons, not to go into minor ones. One is that he lacks the courage. Another is that he lacks the money. Another is that he is fundamentally moral and has a conscience. It takes more sinful initiative than he has in him to plunge into any affair save the most casual and sordid. It takes more ingenuity and intrepidity than he has in himself to carry it off. It takes more money than he can conceal from his consort to finance it. A man may force his actual wife to share the direst poverty, but even the least vampirish woman of the third part demands to be courted in what, considering his station in life, is the grand manner, and the expenses of that grand manner scare all off save a small minority of specialists in deception. So long, indeed, as a wife knows her husband's income accurately, she has a sure means of holding him to his oaths. Even more effective than the fiscal battery is the barrier of poltroonery. The one character that distinguishes man from the other highly vertebrata, indeed, is his excessive timorousness, his easy yielding to alarms, his incapacity for adventure without a crowd behind him. In his normal incarnation he is no more capable of initiating an extra-legal affair, at all events above the mawkish harmlessness of a flirting match with a cigar girl in a cafe, than he is of scaling the battlements of hell. He likes to think of himself doing it, just as he likes to think of himself leading a cavalry charge or climbing the Matterhorn. Often, indeed, his vanity leads him to imagine the thing done, and he admits by winks and blushes that he is a bad one. But at the bottom of all that tawdry pretense there is usually nothing more material than an oafish smirk at some disgusted shop-girl, or a scraping of shins under the table. Let any woman who is disquieted by reports of her husband's derelictions figure to herself how long it would have taken him to propose to her if left to his own enterprise, and let her ask herself if so pusillanimous a creature could be imagined in the role of Don Giovanni. Finally, there is his conscience, the accumulated sediment of ancestral faint-heartedness in countless generations, with vague religious fears and superstitions to leaven and mellow it. What? A conscience? Yes, dear friends, a conscience. That conscience may be imperfect, inept, unintelligent, brumigam. It may be indistinguishable at times from the mere fear that someone may be looking. It may be shot through with hypocrisy, stupidity, play-acting. But nevertheless, as consciences go, in Christendom, it is generally entitled to the name, and it is always in action. A man, remember, is not a being in vacuo. He is the fruit and slave of the environment that bathes him. One cannot enter the House of Commons, the United States Senate, or a prison for felons without becoming, in some measure, a rascal. One cannot fall overboard without shipping water. One cannot pass through a modern university without carrying away scarves. And, by the same token, one cannot live and have one's being in a modern democratic state, year in and year out, without falling, to some extent at least, under that moral obsession which is the hallmark of the mob man set free. A citizen of such a state, his nose buried in Nietzsche, Man and Superman, and other such advanced literature, may caress himself with the notion that he is an immoralist, that his soul is full of soothing sin, that he has cut himself loose from the revelation of God. But all the while there is a part of him that remains a sound Christian, a moralist, a right-thinking and forward-looking man. And that part, in time of stress, asserts itself. It may not worry him on ordinary occasions. It may not stop him when he swears, or takes a nip of whiskey behind the door, or goes motoring on Sunday. It may even let him alone when he goes to a leg show. But the moment a concrete temptress rises before him, her nose snow-white, her lips rouged, her eyelashes drooping provokingly, the moment such an abandoned wench has at him, and his lack of ready funds begins to conspire with his lack of courage to assault and wobble him, at that precise moment his conscience flares into function, and so finishes his business. First he sees difficulty, then he sees danger, then he sees wrong. The result is that he slinks off in trepidation, and another vampire is baffled of her prey. It is, indeed, the secret scandal of Christendom, at least in the Protestant regions, that most men are faithful to their wives. You will travel a long way before you find a married man who admits that he is, but the facts are the facts, and I am surely not one to flout them. 36. The origin of a delusion. The origin of delusion that the average man is a Leopold II or Augustus the Strong, with the amorous experience of a guinea pig, is not far to seek. It lies in three factors, the which I rehearse briefly. 1. The idiotic vanity of men, leading to their eternal boasting either by open lying or sinister hints. 2. The notions of vice crusaders, nonconformist divines, YMCA secretaries, and other such libidinous poltroons as to what they would do themselves if they had the courage. 3. The ditto of certain suffragettes as to ditto. Here you have the genesis of a generalization that gives the less critical sort of woman a great deal of needless uneasiness and vastly augments the natural conceit of men. Some pornographic old fellow, in the discharge of his duties as director of an anti-vice society, puts in an evening plowing through such books as The Memoirs of Fanny Hill, Casanova's Confessions, The Sine Trichomonas of Gaius Petronius, and 2 Samuel. From this perusal he arises with the conviction that life amid the red lights must be one stupendous whirl of deviltry, that the clerk he sees in Broadway or Piccadilly at night are out for revels that would have caused protest in Sodom and Nineveh, that the average man who chooses hell leads an existence comparable to that of a Mormon bishop, that the world outside the Bible class is packed like a sardine can with brigade salesgirls, that every man who doesn't believe that Jonah swallowed the whale spends his whole leisure leaping through the seventh hoop of the Decalogue. Quote, "If I were not saved and anointed of God," end quote, whispers the vice director into his own ear, quote, "this is what I, the Reverend Dr. Jasper Barebones, would be doing. The late King David did it, he was a human, and hence immoral. The late King Edward VII was not beyond suspicion. The very numeral in his name has its suggestions. Millions of others go the same route, ergo, up guards and at 'em. Bring me the pad of blank warrants. Order out the searchlights and scaling ladders. Swear in 400 more policemen. Let to chase these hellhounds out of Christendom and make the world safe from monogamy, poor working girls, and infant damnation." End quote. Thus the hound of heaven, arguing fallaciously from his own secret aspirations. Where he makes his mistake is in assuming that the unconsecrated, while sharing his longing to debauch and to betray, are free from his other weaknesses. For example, his timidity, his lack of resourcefulness, his conscience. As I have said, they are not. The vast majority of those who appear in the public haunts of sin are there, not to engage in overt acts of ribaldry, but merely to tremble agreeably upon the edge of the abyss. They are the same skittish experimentalists precisely who throng the midway at World's Fair, and go to smutty shows, and take in sex magazines, and read the sort of books that our vice-crusading friend reads. They like to conjure up the charms of carnality, and to help out their somewhat sluggish imaginations by actual peeps at it. But when it comes to taking a forthright header into the sulphur, they usually fail to muster up the courage. For one clerk who succumbed to the hours of the pave, there are 500 who succumb to lack of means, the warnings of the sex hygienist, and their own depressing consciences. For one clubman, that is, bagman or suburban vestryman, who invades the women's shops, engages the affection of some innocent miss, lures her into infamy, and then sells her to the Italians, there are 1,000 who never get any further than asking the price of cologne water and discharging a few furtive winks. And for one husband of the Nordic race who maintains the blonde chorus girl in Oriental luxury around the corner, there are 10,000 who are as true to their wives, year in and year out, as so many convicts in a death house, and would be no more capable of any such loathsome malpractice, even in the face of free opportunity, than they would be of cutting off the ears of their young. I am sorry to blow up so much romance. In particular, I am sorry for the suffragettes who specialize in the double standard. For when they get into pantaloons at last, and have the new freedom, they will discover to their sorrow that they have been pursuing a chimera, that there is really no such animal as the male anarchist they have been denouncing and envying, that the wholesale fornication of man, at least under Christian democracy, has little more actual existence than honest advertising or sound cooking. They have followed the pornomaniacs in embracing a piece of buncombe, and when the day of deliverance comes, it will turn to ashes in their arms. Their error, as I say, lies in overestimating the courage and enterprise of man. They themselves, barring mere physical valor, a quality in which the average man is far exceeded by the average jackal or wolf, have more of both. If the consequences to a man of the slightest descent from Virginia were 1/10 as swift and barbarous as the consequences to a young girl in like case, it would take a division of infantry to dredge up a single male flouter of that lex talionis in the whole western world. As things stand today, even with the odds so greatly in his favor, the average male hesitates and is thus not lost. Turn to the statistics of the vice-crusaders if you doubt it. They show that the weekly receipts of female recruits upon the wharves of sin are always more than the demand, that more young women enter upon the vermilion career that can make a respectable living at it, that the pressure of the temptation they hold out is the chief factor in corrupting our undergraduates. What was the first act of the American army when it began summoning its young clerks and college boys and plowhands to conscription camps? Its first act was to mark off a so-called moral zone around each camp, and to secure it with trenches and machine guns, and to put a lot of volunteer termagants to patrolling it, that the assembled jeunesse might be protected in their rectitude from the immoral advances of the adjacent milkmaids and poor working girls. 37. Women as martyrs. I have given 3 reasons for the prosperity of the notion that man is a natural polygamist, bent eternally upon fresh dives into Lake of Brimstone No. 7. To these another should be added, the thirst for martyrdom which shows itself in so many women, particularly under the higher forms of civilization. This unhealthy appetite, in fact, may be described as one of civilization's diseases. It is almost unheard of in more primitive societies. The savage woman, unprotected by her rude culture and forced to heavy and incessant labor, has retained her physical strength, and with it her honesty and self-respect. The civilized woman, gradually degenerated by a greater ease and helped down that hill by the pretensions of civilized man, has turned her infirmity into a virtue, and so affects a feebleness that is actually far beyond the reality. It is by this route that she can most effectively disarm masculine distrust and get what she wants. Man is flattered by any acknowledgment, however insincere, of his superior strength and capacity. He likes to be leaned upon, appealed to, followed docilely, and this tribute to his might caresses him on the psychic plane as well as on the plane of the obviously physical. He not only enjoys helping a woman over a gutter, he also enjoys helping her dry her tears. The result is the vast pretense that characterizes the relation of the sexes under civilization, the double pretense of man's cunning and autonomy and of woman's dependence and deference. Man is always looking for someone to boast to. Woman is always looking for a shoulder to put her head on. This feminine affectation, of course, has gradually taken on the force of a fixed habit, and so it has gotten certain support by a familiar process of self-delusion in reality. The civilized woman inherits that habit as she inherits her cunning. She is born half convinced that she is really as weak and helpless as she later pretends to be, and the prevailing folklore offers her endless corroboration. One of the resultant phenomena is the delight and martyrdom that one so often finds in women, and particularly in the least alert and introspective of them. They take a heavy, unhealthy pleasure in suffering. It subtly pleases them to be hard put upon. They like to picture themselves as slaughtered saints. Thus, they always find something to complain of. The very conditions of domestic life give them a superabundance of clinical material. And if, by any chance, such material shows a falling off, they are uneasy and unhappy. Let a woman have a husband whose conduct is not reasonably open to question, and she will invent mythical offenses to make him bearable. And if her invention fails, she will be plunged into the utmost misery and humiliation. This fact probably explains many mysterious divorces. The husband was not too bad, but too good. For public opinion among women, remember, does not favor the woman who is full of a placid contentment and has no masculine torch to report. If she says that her husband is wholly satisfactory, she is looked upon as a numbskull, even more dense than he is himself. A man, speaking of his wife to other men, always praises her extravagantly. Boasting about her soothes his vanity. He likes to stir up the envy of his fellows. But when two women talk of their husbands, it is mainly atrocities that they describe. The most esteemed woman gossip is the one with the longest and most various repertoire of complaints. This yearning for martyrdom explains one of the commonly noted characters of woman, their eager flair for bearing physical pain. As we have seen, they have actually a good deal less endurance than men. Massive injuries shock them more severely and kill them more quickly. But when acute algesia is unaccompanied by any profounder phenomena, they are undoubtedly able to bear it with a far greater show of resignation. The reason is not far to seek. In pain, a man sees only an invasion of his liberty, strength, and self-esteem. It floors him, masters him, and makes him ridiculous. But a woman, more subtle and devious in her processes of mind, senses the dramatic effect that the spectacle of her suffering makes upon the spectators, already filled with compassion for her feebleness. She would thus much rather be praised for facing pain with a martyr's fortitude than for devising some means of getting rid of it, the first thought of a man. No woman could have invented chloroform, nor, for that matter, alcohol. Both drugs offer an escape from situations and experiences that, even in aggravated forms, women relish. The woman who drinks as men drink, that is, to raise her threshold of sensation and ease the agony of living, nearly always shows a deficiency in feminine characters and an undue preponderance of masculine characters. Almost invariably, you will find her vain and boastful, and full of other marks of that bombastic exhibitionism which is so sterlingly male. End of In Defense of Women, Woman Suffrage, Part 2.